Dr. Heile is with us this evening to explore the question, can a materialist theory of consciousness explain the origins of religion? So please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Heile.
Hi, my name is Frank Heile, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for coming. As he said, I got degrees in physics and worked in software engineering, and I have to promise you that there's going to be no woo in this talk at all. I know there might have been some concerns about that, but there won't be any woo here. Everything I say will be consistent with the laws of physics, and we'll go on with that. So, as an introduction, I'm going to talk about dual process theory. This is a theory in psychology and cognitive science, which has a lot of evidence backing it up. But it posits that there's two processes in the human brain. System one is the fast, intuitive, implicit, automatic, subconscious process. And system two is the slower, deliberative, explicit, controlled, conscious process. This was popularized by Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he mostly talked about the biases that system one can have. It's not very good at doing probability and logic and things like that. It was also popularized by a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking, and there he extolled the virtues of system one. So we've got a balanced view there. There was a conference in 2006 called Into Minds, Dual Process Theories of Reasoning and Rationality. This was about the dual process theory, and it was in Cambridge, England. And a book came out in 2009 where the people that presented at that conference wrote a chapter in this book. So this is kind of related to the conference there. And I want to highlight a paragraph in chapter 2 by one of the organizers, Jay Evans. He says, "There are a number of reasons why it might be a good idea to get away from the system 1 and system 2 terminology. It would be more useful to describe this grand unifying form of dual process theory as the two minds hypothesis." And everything that's in bold here is a direct relationship to my talk tonight. Here I define mind as a high-level cognitive system capable of representing the external world and acting upon it in order to serve the goals of the organism. He goes on and says, this two-mind hypothesis is that the human brain contains not one, but two parallel systems for doing this. Animals, according to this view, have but one system corresponding to the old mind of human beings. Humans have a new mind which coexists in uneasy coalition with the first, sometimes coming into direct conflict with it. This is a strong, even startling hypothesis, which makes it very interesting, if probably wrong. Hopefully, this presentation will make you think that this hypothesis is much more plausible. So I hope I can convince you of that. So part one of my talk is about the LC and PC theory. LC stands for language consciousness, and PC stands for primary consciousness. So the primary consciousness, the PC, corresponds to the old mind of that paragraph, and the LC corresponds to the new mind that's unique to humans. And as you read in the abstract on the website, it said this theory will explain the origin of religion and spirituality about 50,000 years ago. And this quick summary is that the LC thinks it's man, and the LC identified the PC as God. So I'll start with asking, what is consciousness? Well, first of all, in third-person consciousness, you want to know if someone else is conscious. The way that you do that is you see if they respond appropriately to a stimulus. So in other words, if they do something appropriate for the stimulus, they're conscious. In first person, however, we can experience that we're conscious. You know, to paraphrase Descartes, if I think, I see, or I feel, therefore I am conscious. So that's what consciousness is really about from a first person point of view. But we also think and say that we have free will and that we do things, and we think that who I am is my consciousness, and whatever I do is done by my consciousness. So even this first-person consciousness does something. Therefore, if it does something, then it's an agent. And in fact, both of these two minds, this old mind and new mind, the LC and the PC, seem to be intelligent agents. So what does it mean to be an intelligent agent? Well, my favorite definition of intelligence for an agent is that intelligence measures an agent's ability to achieve its goals in a wide range of environments. This is going to lead to the consciousness agent hypothesis on the next slide, and it's the basis of the LC and PC theory. So the conscious agent hypothesis is that if an intelligent agent has goals, can sense the world, and makes representations and models of the world. Representations are like a snapshot and a model of explaining how the world works, be able to make some predictions about it. And is able to perform actions that change the world, and it makes predictions about whether those goals will be achieved by those actions. And a side note, to do this, the agent needs to have a model of itself. It has to know what it is capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing in order to figure out what activities it's going to take to change the world. So if you have all this, and if the model of both the world and the model of the agent itself are sufficiently rich, detailed, and comprehensive, then the agent will be conscious. So that's the way I believe consciousness comes about. Now this implies that there'll be a range of levels of consciousness depending on how rich, detailed, and comprehensive the models are. So humans have a very sophisticated model of the world, and things like worms would have a very unsophisticated model of the world, so there's not going to be much consciousness there. So it all depends on the representational systems that's used by the agent. And it turns out that humans have two different representational systems for the world and for itself. There's the primary representational system, which is where we represent the world through our senses. And then there's the language representational system, where we have a language description of the world, and we can make a one-to-one correspondence between them. And in addition to these two different models of the world, there are two different models of the self in that world. There's the sensory model of the human being, and then there's the pronoun I. That's the model of who I am in language. It's the pronoun I. Therefore, there are two conscious entities, according to my hypothesis. Now, there's a lot of entries on this slide. I'm only going to highlight two of them. First of all, the language consciousness here is easily reportable. We usually, in psychology, they say that somebody is conscious of something if they can report it. And language makes it easy to report. So the language consciousness makes it easy to report things, and it's often taken as being the only consciousness. We think that if we're not language conscious of something, we're not conscious of it at all. However, the primary consciousness can be conscious of things like priming and subliminal perceptions, and it's just difficult to report that without using the LC. So this is conscious without using the LC. Finally, the language consciousness takes most of the credit for living life, but the primary consciousness does most of the work of living. So this is a pictorial picture of that. The LC is living here. It's this language consciousness model of the world and of the self, which is I or me or my, is who man thinks he is. And the world that he's living in is really the sensory model of the world created by the primary consciousness. And there's corresponding objects down here that correspond to each of the items up here in the language consciousness. And then this is the real world that these conscious beings are living in. So the PC is a massively parallel multi-processing system. This is for the computer people out there. It has 100 billion CPUs, 100 trillion wires that connect those CPUs, and there's about 10 million I/O channels that connect out to the external world. The language consciousness, on the other hand, is an emulated virtual single CPU system with serial I/O, running on top of this massively parallel hardware. That's what I think the language consciousness is. That's why this does most of the work of living, and this tends to take all the credit. Okay, now the primary consciousness has been around for hundreds of millions of years. It's developed through animals and through man here. So evolution has built a lot of goals into the primary consciousness, and these are things like staying alive, getting food, reproducing, raising your children, things like that. And these goals are indicated and associated with emotions and feelings and drives and motivations that the primary consciousness is driven by. And since humans are intensely social, many of these goals and emotions promote sociality among humans. And I'll show later that those support the spiritual virtues. Now, there are no goals built into the LC by evolution because the LC only came about 50,000 years ago, and there's not enough time for language consciousness to have had a lot of evolutionary goals built into it. So the only goals that the LC has are the intrinsic goals that any conscious entity would have. And those include, for example, to exist, to be in control so that it can continue to exist. And the language consciousness is built on the parts of the brain that does the long-term future planning, the executive function. So it's going to have the goals appropriate for that function, which is to plan for the future based on the past. And finally, it'll have a goal of being right, because if someone says that it's wrong about its model of the world, or if it's wrong about the actions that it's planning to take, then they're saying that he's not doing a good job of modeling the world, and they want to model the world well on language. Now, if you can see that all these intrinsic goals are selfish and self-centered goals, and those are going to be supporting the spiritual vices. Finally, both the PC and the LC can learn goals and copy goals from one another. For example, the LC goal of being right, the primary consciousness can notice that that's a goal, and it can have an automatic system set up to get angry if somebody ever says that I'm wrong. And I'm sure that's one of the goals that my PC has learned. And then the LC can learn things like, oh, food and sex are good and they're fun. I want to have more and more of those. So the LC can get caught up in those kinds of things. The list of common spiritual virtues would be this list here, and these are mostly coming from the PC since they're mostly pro-social. They certainly help people get along well in society. And then the spiritual vices tend to be selfish and self-centered, and these are mostly from the LC since they are selfish and self-centered. And notice mostly is underlined. It's not 100% black and white. So what's the strengths of the language consciousness? The main strength is that it's the time traveler. It can go forward and backward in time. In fact, a teacher told me it's always rehashing and rehearsing. It's rehashing the past, what happened, why did it happen, and rehearsing the future. What am I going to do, and what if this comes up, what am I going to do there? Now, the LC enabled things like agriculture and the development of large communities. It's science and technology is all a fruit of the language consciousness. So, everything we see around us here today, this computer and everything else all came from the language consciousness. And the world model of the LC can be exported to other humans through language like this, and through books, and from your parents. So the language consciousness has actually gotten stronger and stronger over the years as we've built up a better and better model of the world. And science is our best model of the world. And we culturally inherit the LC from our parents and teachers. So it's inherited outside of the gene pool. We don't get it through our genes, we get it through our culture that we live in. So does the LC help us be happy? Well, since most of the goals of the LC are selfish and self-centered, that can cause a lot of social turmoil. And the LC also tends to do a lot of judgments and complaints and criticisms about itself, about other people, and about the world. It shouldn't be this way. And it's always talking about itself, the self-referential internal narrative, otherwise known as thoughts that we all have. And the LC can form attachments to positive valence feelings and aversions to negative valence feelings. I mentioned those earlier. And this can lead to addictions. I think this is one of the reasons why humans are so addictable, is because of the language consciousness that we have. And it can also greatly amplify and prolong negative valence emotions. So short-term anger can turn into a lifelong resentment due to the language consciousness. Now, an animal only has to live in the world with its primary consciousness and its goals, but the primary consciousness in humans has to live in the world, the actual world, plus the world as created by the language consciousness. And it's going to be bombarding this primary consciousness with all kinds of judgments and criticisms. And this can result in dysfunction in the PC model of the world, since the messages of the LC will distort its model of the world, and it won't be as happy living in the world as it would have been without the LC there. Now, the evidence for this is that it explains many psychological experiments and observations. I talked about dual process theory already. There are split brain experiments. There's the theory of mind test. There's the blind sight phenomenon. There's non-conscious perception and priming, Libet's decision delay experiments. And then it's also consistent with a lot of other theories and models of consciousness. I think it's consistent with Daniel Dennett's meme complex, talking about consciousness that way. Thinking fast and slow, already mentioned. Ned Block has a phenomenal conscious and an access consciousness, and I think those two correspond to the primary and language consciousness. Bernard Barr talks about the global workspace model where it communicates between the LC and the PC. Antonio Damasio talks about core and extended consciousness, which again correspond to the primary and language consciousness. And Julian Jaynes' Bicameral Mind Consciousness was the book that I read that started me on this path. Now, I disagree with Julian Jaynes a lot, but it was the impetus that started me on this. And then there's the User Illusion by Tor Nortenders. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time in this talk to examine all this evidence in detail. If you ask me a question about it in the question and answers, I can pull up a slide for each of these items. Let's talk about modern human evolution for a minute. The last common ancestor with primates was about 6.5 million years ago, a million years before present. And during that 6.5 million years, tool use and sophistication slowly increased over that period of time until about 50,000 years ago. I'll tell you what happened then later. The brain size also slowly doubled, and there was a much larger increase in both the temporal lobe and the frontal lobes, and those are associated with language. This is language input in this lobe and language output in that lobe. The humans developed upright walking and opposable thumbs. They can control fire and they can cook food. And they were basically anatomically modern by about 200,000 years ago. And my hypothesis is that during the 6 million years here, that the vocabulary size and the sophistication of language in these early humans just slowly increased in time over that 6.5 million year period. Until at about 50,000 years ago, there was an abrupt transition. So the abrupt transition included that humans started burying their dead. There were many radically different kinds of tools developed at this time. I mean, it was the tool used before just gradually increased over those millions of years. But in a very short period of time, all kinds of different tools were created using different substances, and it was quite different than it was before. We started using animal hides to make clothing. We hunted using more sophisticated techniques. We engaged in cave painting, and we completed our expansion into Asia and Europe, which started about 25,000 years before that time. Now, earlier humans had gone out to those areas, but this is the breakout of the anatomically modern human from Africa to cover the globe. And Neanderthals went extinct within about 20,000 years after we arrived there. So my hypothesis is that it's the language consciousness that started about 50,000 years ago, and this is when language crossed some threshold to become a universal representational system. And that's what's required to make language into a conscious entity. You have to be able to represent the entire world in language. And so it's the advantages of the LC that caused all these items in this abrupt transition here at 50,000 years ago. Now, theistic religions, when did they start? Well, my hypothesis is that they also started about 50,000 years ago. Obviously, there's no direct evidence for that. There's no artifact that we can say, oh, this means they had religion. However, the burial of the dead started about that time, and that could very well be related to the development of religion at that time, 50,000 years ago. So if both the LC and theistic religion started at the same time, that only proves correlation, not causation. But it seems reasonable that the development of the LC was the cause for the theistic religion, since it was I believe it was the cause of all those other abrupt changes that we saw at 50,000 years ago. So the evidence that I'm going to present to support that is that the first part of the evidence is that there's a plausible hypothesis for a mechanism that could connect the language consciousness to theistic religions. And then additional evidence will come from the fact that we can take religious texts and make the substitution man for LC and God for PC, and we can understand what it's talking about in a non-theistic way by making that substitution. And the theory can also explain the possible efficacy of some of the recommended spiritual practices, and that many of the commonly assumed attributes of God can be understood in terms of this theory. So that's the evidence I have for this. So at the time of the abrupt transition, the LC would have been weaker than it was today because language had just crossed over the threshold of being able to represent the world, and it wouldn't have had the advantages of 50,000 years of additional language development. So they would have been a weaker LC. And when that initially weak LC experienced a much stronger PC that had more power in the world, and with the PC even had power over the LC itself, then the PC could have become identified with God, and the LC is self-identified as man. The LC is man, that's who I am, and this other PC thing, this weird thing is God. And in terms of this theory, the PC created and continues to create the world, the PC world model in which the LC man lives. So it is true that God created the world. And the PC God also created the LC man in his image, because the LC man gave man the illusion of a free will. So, you know, the PC actually did create the LC. So again, in this picture here, the man is the language consciousness and the primary consciousness is God. So the purpose of spirituality that I believe can be demonstrated is that, well, first of all, that the introduction of the LC gave rise to both the theistic and the non-theistic spiritual traditions, and that the real goal of spirituality is to undo some of the difficulties that we have living a happy life due to the problems that the LC creates. In particular, spirituality should diminish the selfish and self-centered goals of the LC, should reduce the judgments, complaints, and criticisms that the LC makes, should reduce the attachment and aversions of the LC, and ideally, spirituality could actually unify the LC and the PC into one conscious being and have them work harmoniously together rather than being at odds with each other. And at the same time, keep all the useful long-term planning, science, and technology functions that the language consciousness has. So if you look at some of the passages in Genesis, for example, you can reinterpret them in terms of the PC and LC theory, and I'm going to highlight only one of them. I'll talk about when God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when they did eat from it, they were expelled from Eden. So they were living in paradise in Eden, and when they ate that fruit, they got expelled from Eden and had to suffer in the world. This describes when the language consciousness became conscious and started judging good and bad. And it's the suffering in the world is the consequences of the language consciousness becoming conscious. And looking at some of the passages of the New Testament, you can do a similar thing, and I'll highlight this one where Jesus said, the Father and I are one. And he's basically saying that the LC and the PC were really one conscious being in Jesus. So he was able to unify them together and make them work harmoniously together. Prayer and meditation are some of the techniques used in religions. And prayer would be an example of the LC trying to explicitly communicate with the PC. And if the prayer is a request for some kind, it can be trying to convince the PC to use its more powerful consciousness to achieve the result that's requested. And if it's a request to know God's will for us and the power to carry it out, this is the LC declaring its willingness to follow through intuition the direction of the PC. And intuition is often the conduit that spiritual people talk about as the way that God talks to them. So it's the intuition talking from the PC to the LC. And if you look at meditation techniques, they all attempt to quiet the LC so that you can experience life directly from the PC. And mantras, for example, repeating a word over and over or a phrase over and over again keeps the LC busy so you can experience life from the PC point of view. If you concentrate on breathing, breathing is the one part of the body that is both under automatic control when you're not talking and under conscious control when you're talking. You have to be able to control the breathing when you're trying to talk. Finally, there's a meditation technique called open monitoring where you just try to pay attention to whatever comes up and just let it go as it comes up. And that's, again, trying to experience life from the PC point of view. And then in terms of some of the attributes that are commonly attributed to God, they're basically all exaggerations of what you could reasonably say about the LC and the PC. The PC is much more powerful than the LC, so if you say that God is all powerful, that's just exaggerating a difference there. Or the God can perform miracles. Since everything that the LC sees comes filtered through the PC could actually change the way that you're perceiving the world and convince the LC that this burning bush means that he should follow the PC's point of view rather than the LC's point of view. Now, I believe that the language consciousness also gave rise to the non-theistic spiritual traditions. And again, when the LC was new, they would have noticed the increased suffering caused by the LC. It would have been more apparent then. And that the suffering comes from attachments of the LC to objects that it thinks it needs and to its stories, judgments, complaints, and criticisms. Many of these paths have a concept of enlightenment of one kind or another. And enlightenment would be a way for you to completely undo the suffering caused by the LC. So if you become enlightened, the LC and PC become united, or you live out as a PC. An example of that is the non-dual state of Eastern spiritual paths. I'm going to talk more about enlightenment in part 2 of this talk. Let me talk a little bit more about Buddhism, though. Buddhism teaches that attachments and aversions are the cause of suffering, and these are greatly amplified by the LC. Buddhism also talks about morality as being both the first and the last training. The second training is concentration, and the third training is wisdom. So you go morality, concentration, wisdom, and morality. Thus, the training in morality is needed both before and after enlightenment, and training in morality is basically training in the spiritual virtues. So trying to let go of the selfishness, self-centeredness, and live in the more pro-social, spiritual virtue world. Now, the second and third training of concentration and insight can result in the realization of not self, and that's described as, upon careful examination, one finds that no phenomenon is really I or mine. These concepts are in fact constructed by the mind. And that means that they aren't real, they're just constructed by that language consciousness. The I of the language consciousness isn't a real person. Now, Buddhism also talks about the concept of Buddha nature, and this was when the Buddha realized that all beings have the same nature and potential for enlightenment, and this is known as Buddha nature. So this applies to animals too. They have the Buddha nature. Obviously, therefore, the Buddha nature corresponds to the PC, and this not self, this fictitious self, the I, corresponds to the LC. So it's a way of seeing that you're not really your LC, that you really are the PC, is what the whole point of Buddhism is, in this theory. Zen Buddhism talks about nirvana. This is the enlightenment state that Zen Buddhists talk about. And one of the things they say is that you cannot describe it in language, that if you attempt to describe it in language, you automatically fail, and that's because describing it in language makes it an LC thing, and it's got to be a PC thing for it to be experienced. Another Zen technique is to concentrate on koan, and a koan is a question or a statement that has doesn't make logical sense to the LC. This is a way to get you to give up being the LC and experience life from the PC point of view. There's a school of non-duality, which I'm not going to talk about a lot here, but I'll just show these pictures, which is that the dual person is the person that thinks that they're the language consciousness. And for the dual person, the self or the subject is the language consciousness itself. The world that they live in is the world of the PC. And so the self and the world are not one, and that the subject and the objects are not one. Objects are out there in the world. They're made out of different things than the subject is made out of. And that's what non-dualism says, that the difference between subject and object disappears, and that the world and I are one is what non-dualism describes. So in non-dualism, if you're living as a PC, then the self is the PC, the world that you're living is composed of the PC, and the objects are all part of that world that you're living as, so the self and the objects are one. And the LC turns into just a language system, because it's a tool to use, but it's not who I am. So an enlightened person can use language, but it's just a tool, it's not who they are. So that brings me to part 2 of my 3-agent theory. First of all, the division into 3 agents is suggested by the gross neuroanatomy of the brain, that I'll show. And it's also motivated by evidence that there are more than one kind of enlightenment, and that the 3-agent theory can explain these 2 kinds of enlightenment. And it's a superset of the PC and LC theory, as you'll see. First of all, if you just look at the gross neuroanatomy of the brain, there are 3 lobes at the back of the brain here: the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe. And this is where all the primary sensory inputs come in. Vision comes into the occipital lobe, audition comes into the temporal lobe, and the parietal lobe is where the somatosensory cortex is to experience the body. So it's apparent that the sensory model of the world is constructed in these 3 lobes. So I'm calling these 3 lobes the experiencer. That's one of the 3 agents, the experiencer. Now, this area also has Wernicke's area, which is for language perception, and the temporal lobe is also thought to contain the semantic memory. Semantic memory is like the memory of facts, like Paris is the capital of France, is an item in my semantic memory. So this also contains the language model of the world. Whoops, I went too far. This also contains the language model of the world. So it's got the language model of the world and the sensory model of the world, both contained in the experiencer. If you look at what's left, which is the frontal lobes do have the motor cortex right here, so it controls the body. So I named another agent the doer. It's the one who does things, so the one who makes the body do things is the doer. And in addition, it also has Brokaw's area for speech production, so I call it the talker. The talker and the doer are two agents that are in the frontal lobe of the brain. And together they have to share 40% of the brain, whereas the experiencer has 60% of the brain to itself. So those are the three agents, the talker, the doer, and the experiencer. In terms of a block diagram, this is the experiencer here, and it has both the language model of the world and the sensory model of the world, and there's more or less a continuous hierarchy of categories between these two models of the world. You know, it's increasing levels of abstraction in the categories there. So the experiencer has input of both spoken and written language coming in through the eyes or the ears, and it also has vision, hearing, and all the bodily senses coming in to help create the sensory model of the world. Then the talker is the language agent, and it produces both spoken and written language output. And the doer is the motor agent, and it controls all the muscles and glands of the body, so it makes the body do things. The primary goals of the primary consciousness will be here in the doer. The language goals of the talker will be in the talker here. And the only goal that the experiencer has is to create a model of the world as accurately as possible. So, in addition to those three agents, each agent, according to my hypothesis, has to have a self-model. So what do the self-models look like? The self-model allows the agent to know what it can do, and you, whoever you think you are, also need a self-model. Now, if you think that you're the talker, your self-model will be the talker self-model. If you think you're the doer, the self-model will be the doer self-model. If you think you're the experiencer, your model will be the experiencer self-model. And parts of these self-models can be experienced by the experiencer, and parts of them will be represented in language in the experiencer, and parts of them will be represented in the agent itself. So the experiencer self-model is just presence, or another word for it is a sense of being. It's the who I am, who it is that is experiencing the world. When you experience the color red, whatever it is that is experiencing that color red is the presence. The doer self-model would include the experiencer self-model as the basis of it, and then it would add on all the senses of doing and feeling that the doer does. The doer does things in the world. And the goals of the doer contain the doer and also are part of the doer self-model. The talker self-model will include the experiencer and the doer as part of its self-model, plus a lot more, like the complete life story of the talker, the short-term and long-term plans for the future of the talker, the complete list of judgments, complaints, criticisms, resentments, regrets, obsessive attachments to people, places, and things, and the models of the doer and experiencer expressed in language. So, and the experiencer also experiences the talker. Oh my gosh, 10 minutes? Okay, I gotta speed up here. It's the inner voice is what the experiencer experiences from the talker. It's that inner voice. And that's the inner voice that's saying, that's me, that's who I am. So the symbols that represent the talker are your name plus I, me, and mine. And these symbols are probably the most complicated symbols in your entire language system. So going back to here, there's a couple things I left off. So the talker has the inner voice that's going to the experiencer. The doer has to also control top-down attention and also has to tell the experiencer about the plans that it's planning to move the body, because that affects the way that the experiencer is going to experience the world. So in addition to that, there is also self-models for each of these three agents. And there's one of these arrows. I've drawn three of them here, but there's only one of these agents will be who you are. So if you think you're the talker, it'll be this self-agent model here, this pointer. If you think you're the doer, it's this one. If you think you're the experiencer, it's this one. So first of all, the language consciousness of the previous theory is the one where we think we are the talker. That's who I think I am, as the talker. The PC, the primary consciousness, is one that I think I'm the doer. That would be when I'm a primary consciousness. And then the experiencer would be another level of enlightenment. I'll just skip over this. There's a doctor who has come up with some research and found several different kinds of symbolic experience. There's also experience from just reading some books. You can hear people that talk about two different levels of enlightenment. So this three-agent model will explain these two different levels of enlightenment. And it will also explain the techniques used for enlightenment. So to talk about that, it's helpful to go through potentially 5 stages. I just came up with 5 stages of spiritual stages for humans. There's the normal modern human who's not interested in spirituality or anything else. Then there's the virtue seeker who's trying to cultivate the spiritual virtues and to avoid the spiritual vices. There's the person with spiritual surrender who's trying to turn their will and their life over to the care of God. And then there's the first enlightened state called the unitive state. This is when a theistic person would say they've achieved unity with God at this point. And then there's a state called the no-self state. This is the second enlightened state. And this is, they report here that the sense of self has disappeared in this enlightened state. So how real are these stages? I think we all know people who say they're on stages 1 through 3. Stages 4 and 5 are not as common in Western culture, but they are explained in Eastern traditions. And there's a number of different names for this enlightened state, for these different kinds of enlightenment state, depending on tradition. So the normal modern human up through spiritual stage 3, you still think that you're the language consciousness. You're trying to maybe decrease the spiritual vices of the language consciousness and increase the spiritual virtues, but you still think you're the language consciousness. And then in the unitive state, you think that you're the doer. And then finally, in the no-self state, you think that you're the experiencer. So who I am is just the experiencer itself. So there's just experiencing the world as it's going along and not controlling the world. Now, even when you're in the experiencer mode here, the talker and the doer can still operate. They still are able to move the body and you're still able to talk to people. But it's just your internal experience will be different when you're in the experiencer mode. So spiritual practices, first of all, you do need to have spiritual practices that reduce the selfishness and self-centeredness. Otherwise, you'll become an enlightened person who acts selfish and self-centered. So that's not a recommended way of doing it. And I'll also use the 3-agent theory to talk about enlightenment techniques, and I'm going to have to skip a lot of those. But let me talk about meditation, how meditation causes enlightenment. First of all, teachers will tell you not to judge the meditation. And the reason is that judging is what the talker does. So if you're judging, you're staying as the talker. There are 2 fundamental types of meditation, focused attention and open monitoring. It's said that open monitoring is more effective than focused attention at causing enlightenment. And the explanation is that when you're in open monitoring, you're just the experiencer generating bottom-up attention, whereas the focused attention has the doer controlling the experiencer using top-down attention. Now, focused attention still helps, though, because any attempt to control attention will try to minimize the talker, because the talker is the most frequent interrupter and monopolizer of attention. A body scan, again, is strengthening neural connections to the body and decreasing the talker's ability to interrupt. And mantras is, again, a way of keeping the language consciousness busy. And it can also be promoting pro-sociality and positive emotions, depending on what the mantra is. Open monitoring helps. There's a technique called noting, where you, again, just note what happens, what you're currently experiencing, hot, cold, itch, whatever. And that's, again, keeping the talker busy with the noting, but experiencing life from the experiencer's point of view. And using these kind of meditation techniques can change who you are from the talker self-agent to either the doer or to the experiencer self-agent, and result in enlightenment. It's often reported that it takes many years of meditation to do this, though. There are techniques that are faster. And these I'm going to have to just skip through. If you want to talk about these, you can ask me about them in the question and answer period. There's headless way. There's a technique called self-inquiry, where you're trying to ask, who am I? There's a practice called actualism, where they try to accentuate the pure conscious experience of being in the experiencer. There's living in the now, that's frequently cited as a way of becoming enlightened. And living in the now means that you're not going to be the talker as much as you were before. And then finally, acceptance is an important spiritual virtue. And I'll just say that Krishnamurti once asked his audience, do you want to know what my secret is? This is an enlightened guru who was teaching his audience. And he said his answer was, you see, I don't mind what happens. And as an experiencer, he does not mind what happens. He's just accepting the world the way it is. So that's That's acceptance. Gratitude and forgiveness are important spiritual virtues, but they can also result in enlightenment. One of my favorite sayings is that forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. Because it's the talker that's holding on to the unforgiveness, the resentment, and regret. And then not seeking. A lot of spiritual teachers will tell you not to seek enlightenment. And if you're seeking enlightenment, you're the talker, because that's what the talker does. He seeks things in the future. So finally, is the LC the villain? I kind of made the LC the villain in this whole talk, but it's not completely the villain. This theory itself is an LC theory. This was created by my language consciousness up here. Now, let me ask you, did this LC theory make anybody enlightened here today? No hands. Oh, there's one right there. Okay, this is my first enlightened person from a talk. Thank you. So I don't think this theory can actually make you enlightened, but it might motivate you to do whatever practice it takes to become enlightened. And another thing, for example, the PC evolved when humans lived in tribes of maybe 50 to 200 people. And you were altruistic to everybody in your tribe, you helped everybody, and you lived together. But you had wars with all the neighboring tribes, and you killed lots of people with the neighboring tribes. So that's the environment that the PC was evolved into. Now the LC can come along and can declare that all 7 billion people on the planet Earth right now are my tribe. Now some people stop at the borders of their country, but ideally they could make it into the whole world. And so that's obviously an advantage. And finally, the more selfish talker can see the value of having a goal of eliminating selfishness. Even though I'm selfish, I can see that it would be valuable for relationships with people in my life if I wasn't as selfish as I am. And so it can make this the goal and can help to, the talker can then help to adopt that new goal and try to overcome its own selfishness and self-centeredness, and even to overcome the doer's occasional learned or innate selfish goals and behaviors. So in fact, the talker may make the decision to find and choose a spiritual path because of how unsatisfactory his life is. So if the talker is suffering enough, he may go out looking for some solution, and that's where he may come up with a solution. So that's my theory. Did I make it in 40 minutes? Okay, hey. Questions and comments, and then also, if you want to get a copy of this presentation, you can send an email to me at frank@heile.org. All I ask is that you send me some feedback after you've read it. Right. Yes.
All right, you're on the hot seat.
Thank you very much. That talk was really packed with concepts and information, and we intellectuals appreciate that. I have the overall problem I have with your talk is that, in fact, just as you said, you make the language consciousness the villain. And in my experience with the world and observation of the world, the language consciousness is much of what is a positive force in the world and has made most of modern humanity even possible. You conceded that in one slide, but most of your talk, it seems to me, was from a religious perspective. That is, you were saying, spirituality is wonderful and God is wonderful and, PC is wonderful, and there's this language consciousness that fucks everything up and is the vices, not the virtues. It's all vices. On the contrary, I think it's mostly the virtues. So I'd like you to go a little, expand on the positive side of language consciousness, because you're giving too much credit to spirituality, religious nonsense, and all that comes from the PC. Give me the good part of the LC, please.
Okay, well, I did already. I said the science and technology. Science and technology is the good part of the LC, living in the world that we're living in right now. I'm a software engineer. I use my language consciousness to program computers. That's what programming a computer is language consciousness. I do think that it has virtues. I did make it a little bit more one-sided. In fact, I've gotten this feedback before, and so for the book that I'm writing, I will try to take a more balanced view. But this is my presentation as of today. The other thing, I know I'm talking to the atheist club here, and spirituality, get thee away from me. I share that in terms of religion. I mean, religion with its dogma, I mean, the Islamists and the Catholics and the whatever, you know, all the dogma that they have and the anti-science point of view that they have, I am not in favor of any of that at all. That's bad. That's a bad use of the language consciousness, though. It's their language consciousness that's created this dogma and this thing here that says, I have to believe this. You know, this book is holy and it's from God, and, you know, this is all language consciousness construction. So all the stuff that you hate about religion, the organized religion like that, is coming from the language consciousness of those people. So you can't be thinking that language consciousness is all wonderful. Okay, I didn't convince her. Yes.
Yeah, so I think I'm speaking then as a language consciousness now in here, right?
Right.
And I'm looking at this primary consciousness. And if I understand it correctly, all my emotions and all my senses, and in fact my whole model of the world is growing through my primary consciousness, and that's my source of everything. So all these words I'm using are basically analogies for something in that growing world.
Correct.
So you were saying the primary consciousness is like God because, well, you can find God, all aspects of God there, all the mystery and the unknown and these nonsense stories. But if I'm looking at the primary consciousness, I'm seeing everything in my world there. I'm seeing my source for science, my source for language, my source for corporations, my source for human beings. Actually, my source of knowing my own body and movements and history of my own life is coming through my primary consciousness. So I don't dispute you can analogize God on there, but you can analogize every single word and everything we do within our languaged symbolic world, including science comes from there as well, and everything comes from there because words have no meaning without being related to something in the world of our primary consciousness. That's one thing, so that's one question. It's much broader than God. And the other one is your motor. You showed motor and language is different, but to my understanding, modern language theory says that language is created and exists in the mind. And so language, if we talk, what I'm doing now is moving my muscles. So language is actually, in that model, to my mind, is a subset of the motor system because I can only create this. We're having 60 different conversations here, right? Or creating 60 different conversations of what I'm saying in each head. And that's done from me just moving my muscles. So the motor system is required for language. They're not two separate things.
You're absolutely right. You cannot talk without the doer participating in it. The doer has to participate in order for me to talk. The idea is, though, that if I went back to that one slide, well, instead of going back to the slide, the Broca's area in the brain there is the part that's creating language that I'm going to produce, that I'm going to say. So it has to produce the concept, and then it has to devolve it to the hardware of the doer to actually produce the words that come out of my mouth. So that's the doer that's doing all the words coming out of my mouth. It's the concepts created by the language consciousness in the Broca's area there. And then the movement of my lips and the vocal cords and the breathing and all that stuff is all handled by the doer. So you're right, they're related. But, you know, from a functional point of view, if you've got a language model of the world that you're living, that is, you know, the thing that you're living in. The other point I want to get to is that you were saying that everything has to be grounded in the primary consciousness. It does. And for example, the philosophical point of view that I take is, I'm blanking on the word now, that statements in science only make sense if you can have an observation that agrees with your theory. Okay, what's that called?
Evidence.
Say? Evidence. Well, evidence. Okay. So you know, in order to do any experiment, you have to use your doer to do the experiment. You have to perceive something in the world, whether it's a meter, an indicator on a meter, or you're seeing a flash of light, or whatever it is that you're perceiving as the evidence of your experiment. You have to use your sensory system to perceive that, and then it gets translated into language. You see if it agrees with the theory that you've got, and if it doesn't agree, then you change your theory and you do a different experiment. So it's definitely a cycle of going through language and down into the primary consciousness. Language consciousness and primary consciousness together is needed in order to do science. And you know, all of that is represented in the experiencer. The experiencer does both the language model of the world, which is what science is the language model of the world, plus the sensory model of the world. The division into the two different agents is really on the output side. It's the talker that does the talking, and it's the doer that does the movement of the body. The perceiving is all done by the experiencer. So it is very unified over there on the experiencer side. They are unified together. Yes?
Along the way there, I saw you were talking about language consciousness goals as selfish vices and self-centered, right? LC goals. And it seems to me that this concept of me and I is something that's very intrinsic to all animals, and that all animals have essentially what amounts to a self-centered or selfish motivation to survive. And so I don't understand why that would be, something that comes out of language consciousness and not out of primary consciousness.
Well, in that foil there, I said mostly, the PC is mostly the spiritual virtues, and the LC is mostly the vices, mostly the selfish, self-centered vices. It's true that the primary consciousness, when it's starving, it will eat the last morsel of food and not share it with its family. So the primary consciousness can be selfish and self-centered. If it's a matter of life or death, it will definitely choose life over being altruistic and possibly dying. So it can be selfish and self-centered, but it's just much more. The intrinsic goals that the LC has to exist and to be in control and those kinds of things are all selfish and self-centered. Now, the language consciousness can learn, getting back to your things, the language consciousness can learn to try to be less selfish and less self-centered. And that's a good thing, and that's part of what I think these spiritual practices are doing, is helping you to learn that. And so, language consciousness, to the extent that it's able to let go of its selfishness and self-centeredness, can be more altruistic and more giving. And animals can also be selfish and self-centered. When you have two dogs fighting over the food, they're not being altruistic and not being giving to each other. So it can go both ways. I just think the preponderance is one way or the other. Yes.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions over here, but I wanted to see if there's anybody back there. Wow, okay. Let me just bounce around a little bit after this one.
On the LC versus PC, the thing that shocked me, one of the most shocking things I've ever seen, was when two groups of monks in a temple in Asia took 2x4s after each other in some possession thing over the temple there. And I was thinking everything they ever taught each other about, their other consciousness broke down over territorial rights. Yeah. I guess it happens to all of us.
Right. I think we're all human, so yeah, we're all going to exhibit that sometimes.
A couple of questions. One is within this frame of mind, or the theory that you have, what is the role of, or what is the value of consciousness, and what's the goal for consciousness? One, and I was a little confused as far as PC and LC, which one is the altruistic and which one is the self-centered? Because in animals, you can see some, according to what I got from your talk, is that PC is not self-centered and LC is. Whereas in animals, we can see that there are evidences of altruism and vice versa. In humans, we can see that as well. And what do you attribute it to PC or LC?
Well, it's because we're social animals. The social animals have to be able to learn to get together, to get along with each other, and to be supports for each other. I mean, the ants and those kind of social bees and ants and things like that, are the ones where they give up their right to reproduce, to just work for the colony and to produce the queen's eggs and turn them into more workers. So they've given up everything in order to be part of that society. We're not that far along on the sociality scale, but we are definitely a social animal. We lived in tribes for millions of years, tribes of 50 to 200 people that worked together and foraged together and moved around together and supported each other and fought wars with neighboring tribes. But we were altruistic with the people within our group. So if you talk about an individual solitary animal that is not a social animal, they will be much more selfish and self-centered. But look at dogs in our house. They love us.
I got two quick questions. The first one is, you use the word spirituality quite a bit. Can you please explain what you mean by spirituality? And the second question is, does spirituality increase evolutionary fitness? If so, how does it do that?
Well, I don't think that, as I said, I don't think the LC, for example, is a product of evolution per se. There was not enough time. 50,000 years is not enough time. You know, if you look at it, 50,000 years is like less than 1% of the 6.5 million years that humans evolved. So in the last 1%, that's when that big explosion of all those new things came about, and that's all from the LC. So there wasn't any evolutionary pressure. There was evolutionary pressure to increase our vocabulary during the 6 million years, but not to actually result in a whole new kind of consciousness called the language consciousness. That's something that was kind of an artifact that produced all these wonderful things that we have today. And then if you look at that, the language consciousness in the last 100 years, look at what it's done, you know, and that's a tiny fraction of the 50,000 years that we've been language conscious. So it's our language model of the world that's getting better and better and better, and science and technology and all that stuff is getting better and better. And now I forgot your other question.
What does spirituality mean when you say that word?
Spirituality, yes. The hard question. That's why I forgot that one. Well, I especially use the word spiritual instead of the word religious, because religious has to do with dogma, this is true, and anybody who doesn't believe this is evil and bad, and, you know, and wars are fought over dogma, the religions, and things like that. I would hope that a truly spiritual person wouldn't be fighting wars about spirituality. So I hope it's kind of the good parts, if there are, I know it's hard for you to imagine that there's any good parts, but the good parts of religion would be spirituality. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks. That was a really great talk. I was fascinated by it. It's engaging. I have 1,000 questions, but in sake of time, I'm going to limit it to, if I may, 2. One is that Julian Jaynes talked about a left-right asymmetry. I believe, if I understand it correctly, he put the language consciousness in the right temporal lobe, and he put the primary consciousness in the left. If you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it. And my second question is that obviously the primary consciousness is capable of decisions and judgments. I mean, for millions of years, animals have done such things. So how can you tell when a decision or a judgment comes from the, you know, actually from the language consciousness, or whether it's something from the primary consciousness that's just being vocalized by the language consciousness?
Okay. So first of all, Julian Jaynes was like the first book that I read that started me on this path, you know, his left-right brain stuff. I think he was wrong in a lot of ways. For example, he claimed that this transition, he claimed that for a long time humans had a bicameral mind. So there were 2 minds. There was the God mind in the right half, and then there was us in the left half of the brain, the language part that can talk. And that it was only 3,000 years ago that this bicameral mind broke down into the modern mind that we have today. I cannot believe that that would have happened just 3,000 years ago. If he had said it happened 50,000 years ago, maybe I would have believed it, but not 3,000 years ago. And secondly, his claim that everything is so lopsided, this is all language on the left side and no language on the right side, or only the God language on the right side, that just, it's not true. As a computer person, the entire brain here is the CPU. Now, I'm talking about the old-fashioned CPU where it was a big box underneath the desk. That's the CPU. The cable where you plug in the keyboard and the monitor, those are where on the left side of the brain here. This is the input and output port of language. And it's only on one side of the brain because you only plug a cable in on one side. You don't plug it in on both sides. So that's what I think it was wrong about too. Now, the second part of your question was decisions, yes. I've got a story if you'll give me a minute here. Imagine that 2 of your best friends come and pick you up from your house. They drive you off to this building. They take you into the building. They go into a small room, they hold you down, and then a man comes in and he tortures you for like 5 minutes. And this whole time, your friends have not explained what they're doing, why they're doing it. All you know is you're feeling torture for 5 minutes. No permanent body damage, but it's very painful. So, when you came out of that experience, would they be your friends anymore? Would you cross them off of your life forever, not have anything to do with them, hold a resentment forever and ever? Well, exactly that same experience was experienced by my dog. My wife and I had to take him in to get his anal gland expressed. We held him down. The vet came in and tortured him for 5 minutes. It might have only been 1 minute. It seemed like 5 minutes to me. And he was squirming and yelping and not trying to get away, and we were holding him there. As soon as the vet stopped, he was the same loving dog. He didn't try to bite us. He wasn't resentful. He went with us happily from then on. He didn't reject us completely. Now, it's not that he forgets. The next time we had to go back to that vet, he was very reluctant to go in that building. He still went in the building with us because he trusted us. So it's not like he forgot. He knew what that building meant. And that's the difference. My dog was the PC. The first scenario was the LC.
Yeah. So towards the end of your talk, you compared being enlightened to going back to the PC. So pretty much, if you will, getting rid of your ego, yourself, getting back to your experiences. And with that comes altruism and being less selfish. I have a 3-year-old. And I feel like when you're having that talk saying you grow into your language consciousness, we're born selfish. We are born not altruistic. We don't understand language. So how do you make the thing with that? Because we're not born altruistic. There's been studies that have been shown with children that altruism and being kind and selflessness grows with them as they grow into culture.
Yes, I think there's a lot of things going on. First of all, like the terrible twos, right? The terrible twos, I think that's the beginning of the language consciousness. That's the yes, no, 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 no is the favorite word. And
they're quite selfish before that, so where do you find the time?
before two, they're quite selfish. Yeah, they are programmed to cry to get mom to feed them, to cry to get mom to take to clean their diaper, all that kind of stuff. Yes, they have that programmed in as part of them as the instinct for survival. But I think that it's the fact that we're a social animal. If we were solitary animals, then we would all be selfish and self-centered. We would spend only the minimum amount of time necessary with our parents to get out on our own, and then be off on our own, individuals out in the woods, finding our own prey, and just occasionally getting together to mate to make more babies. But that's the only time we get together with anybody else. But we're a very social animal. We want to be around people and around societies, and we have to raise our children for 13 years, or 18, or 25 years, who knows how long, before they can go out on their own. And we started in groups of 50 to 100 to 200 people in tribes, up until, well, forever. It's been that way. And we're more social and more altruistic than, for example, chimps. Chimps are very territorial, not just territorial, but also dominance. They have a lot of dominance. The head chimp is in charge, and the other ones. We're more like the bonobos. If you know about the bonobos, that's us. We're the bonobos.
Okay, we're going to do 4 more questions. We got 1, 2, 3. Anybody else? 4. Okay, then we'll stop, and then you can torture him afterwards.
I found your comment about humans going through the transition about 50,000 years ago. And the transition produced what we refer to as modern humans, which we are today.
Right.
In the last 50,000 years, the primary world has gone from what I would think of as the natural world to one which is very, very different. It's an artificial world which we have created on our own. So in terms of trying to comprehend how us modern humans fit into our world, I have some difficulty dealing with your concept of the primary versus the language, because our world today is essentially a language-created world for most of us, certainly not all of us. There's very few modern-type humans who live in a natural world. It's pretty much gone for most of us.
Well, we still eat, we still have children, we still have sex, we still, do all the things that a body does. We're still bodies, we're still alive in our body. And it just shows how adaptable a primary consciousness is. It can change from living in a savanna and trees and coming and living in skyscrapers and, going to work at an office.
But we don't hunt animals anymore, most of us.
No, we don't.
We don't go out into the forest and pick fruit and dig roots and things
Right.
of that sort.
We have a much easier life, don't we? So, and that's all due to the language consciousness. The language consciousness produced this world that we have. It has all the science and technology all came from the LC. It didn't come from the PC. But the PC can live in this world just fine.
Okay. So nice talk, thank you. I'm trying to understand, you say that the language consciousness has no goals, but then why would it, raises the question, why would it evolve? Why would we even have it? And you say it's only involved, I'm not quite buying the argument that it's only had 50,000 years. I thought you said that it appeared 50,000 years ago, which means that all the pressures to evolve it occurred before those 50,000 years. So we've had millions of years to have those pressures, and now we've just been experiencing it for 50,000 years.
So what I believe happened is during the 6.5 million years from the last common ancestor with the primates, there was definitely evolution in terms of walking upright, opposable thumb. The brain size increased by a factor of 2 relative to body size. We have twice as much brain per body than a chimp has. So the brain increased twice as much. And in fact, the areas that support language increased more than the rest of the brain. The temporal lobes and the frontal lobes, where the language is both understood and produced. So there were definitely adaptations caused by evolution to increase our ability to use words. Using words is not the same as a language consciousness. So I can imagine over that 6.5 million years, maybe the vocabulary went from, 3 grunts back 6.5 million years ago to maybe a couple hundred words, maybe 1 million years ago, to maybe 1,000 words 100,000 years ago, to at 50,000 years, it suddenly blossomed where you can create new words easily by defining them in terms of old words, and you got enough old words now to represent a lot of the world, and you can create the new worlds that you want. And it's like a side effect. The language consciousness is a side effect of evolution. It's not the goal of evolution. And that's why I claim that it doesn't have time for goals to be built into the language consciousness itself. Now, there's goals built into the primary consciousness because it's been going along for hundreds of millions of years of evolution. So it's finely tuned goals built into it. But the language consciousness had this world of words that have been gradually increasing over that time. But there's kind of a phase transition where it goes from liquid to solid, like ice freezing. That's what happened when language consciousness developed. It was a phase transition that evolution couldn't have anticipated and didn't have time to build any goals into it.
How is your theory impacted if, in fact, there are no spiritual states of enlightenment in reality, and I myself don't believe in any? How does that affect your theory?
Well, I think that Dr. Jeffrey Martin has interviewed at least a couple of hundred of people that claim enlightenment, and he understands, charlatans from people who are actually talking the truth. He's talked to enough people to be able to tell them apart. And he's the one that claimed that there were these 4 different stages, the PNSC 1, 2, 3, 4. And I lumped 1, 2, and 3 together because they're all similar, and then 4 is different. So, I think there is enlightenment, and I think that there's probably increasing scientific evidence for it, in my opinion. But we can disagree.
If it didn't exist, would that impact your theory? In other words, is your theory dependent on
No, because I think that the goal of trying to get the language consciousness and primary consciousness to work better together is that's the first 3 of, I had 5 stages there. 3 of them were not enlightenment. So the stages 1, 2, and 3. Stage 1 is the normal human who doesn't have any interest in spirituality at all. Stage 2 is where we're trying to cultivate the virtues and not have the vices so much. And then stage 3 is where the LC is really trying to turn its life over to the PC, trying to listen to the intuition from the PC more often than going off on its own. So I think those 3 stages are real, and they are helpful, just those 3 stages alone, even if you cross off stage 4 and stage 5. Yes?
So I'm hearing that the goal here of this way of looking at religion and spirituality is to transcend and find enlightenment. And I'm having trouble with where you started in the beginning about the PC and the LC and PC equating that with God. I guess I'm feeling like, and I can't explain this technically, but like maybe you're trying to force a definition of God that brings people back into the brain. And so I can appreciate that in terms of it's the individual who can find that enlightenment for themselves and doesn't need something external. But at the same time, I guess, to me, the common way of thinking about God over the ages has been something external where we don't have that control, and so we find ways to explain that. And so bringing that back into just the brain, you've probably thought about this, if just having some comments about these observations I'm making.
Well, I'm not 100% sure where you're going. I mean, it's certainly true that there have been lots of other explanations for religion and spirituality. Dan Dennett talks about, that our brain is wired to look for causes of things. What was the cause of this happening? And if there's a hurricane, what caused it? If there's an earthquake, what caused it? Was it something we did? We can make all kinds of theories like that to try to explain, why things happen, and that could contribute to the way that the God theories developed. But I think the beginning of it was what I was talking about before, which is that the brand new weak language consciousness experienced that there was a more conscious being that was in control of its life, and it said that's God. Now, once you start at that point there, once you get that, then you could start exporting that God to be external to me. It's not part of me. It's external to the whole world. It's up in the heavens somewhere, and it's, that you can get into all kinds of mythology and other constructs that don't have anything to do with this theory. And those are, I would call, religion rather than spirituality.
Okay, so let's give Frank another round of applause.